Give us your 5 reasons why the Coronation stone is a fake.
On Christmas Day 1950, a bunch of students, Hamilton, Matheson, Stuart and Vernon, went down to Westminster Abbey and lifted what purported to be the Stone of Destiny, otherwise known as the Stone of Scone, and supposedly the stone upon which Scottish kings had been crowned for centuries. They brought it back. There was uproar across the country. Police were searching for them high and low, and eventually a stone, a few months later, was brought into Arbroath Abbey, and a statement was put out to the press saying this is a stone that had been taken from Westminster. However, ever since then there have been constant rumours that the stone that was returned to Arbroath Abbey was not in fact the stone that had been taken from Westminster. According to the stories I have heard, and some people I spoke to when I was younger claimed to have been there were several copies, maybe as many as 3, made of the stone, and it was one of these substitutes that was given to the guys that took it to Arbroath Abbey. At the same time, the supposed original stone was taken by car up Glen Lyon and buried. Where? I have no idea. Now this obviously casts doubt on the authenticity of the stone that is currently being used in the pomp and ceremony that's about to take place down in Westminster. But it does raise 1 or 2 other interesting questions. If it was the wrong stone that went back, is the real stone still up there? But even more interesting, was the stone they took the original stone? Because it has long been thought that the stone that was taken down south in 1296 by Edward I, who had come rampaging north with a vast army to conquer Scotland, which he claimed was his by right, it was not. He came up and he headed to Scone because he'd heard about the Stone of Destiny, Stone of Scone, call it what you will, and he thought that by purloining it, he would therefore be taking effectively the sovereignty of Scotland, and he would just wheak it back down to London and use it for all future coronations in England. The problem was that from what we know of the period, Edward and his troops arrived in Scone, settled down quite calmly, and then 2 days later they went on the rampage. And there has been consistent rumour that this was because Edward realised that the stone that was sitting there on Moot Hill at Scone was in fact a forgery, and that they were basically searching to try and find it. Now the story goes that the abbot, who had plenty warning that Edward was heading north and knew fine he wanted the Stone of Destiny, had arranged for a substitute stone to be made, and that the original was taken away and hidden. Now this brings into play some of the older Scottish records which actually refer to the Stone of Destiny as the Black Marble Chair, whereas the large boulder that was taken from Scone is of course red sandstone, strangely enough what the entirety of Perthshire is made of. And this subterfuge by the abbot of Scone is possibly reinforced by something else, and that is that the throne, the chair in which the stone has been sitting in Westminster for over 600 years, is made of wood. And there are again some records that suggest that initially Edward had ordered a bronze throne to be made to hold this magnificent mystical object, but having realised that he'd been sold a pup, that he just basically used this wooden one, which, according to people I know who have worked in the casting industry, the throne, I suppose you call it, that is being used is in actual fact part of a pattern for making a metal throne, which would have been the bronze one that you'd initially had in mind. So the dubiety as regards the stone seems to be cropping up in all sorts of different areas. And of course the clincher for some people was that in the middle of the 19th century, 1848, there was a report in a local newspaper that somebody on the hill of Dunsinane, famed in the play by the English playwright Shakespeare, that someone had been excavating on the top of it and had found a black stone, about 300 weight, and it supposedly had with it a plaque written in what language is very, very unclear, but basically saying whoever sits here has the sovereignty of Scotland. Some kind of translation like that. Nobody's absolutely sure. But that once this was found, it then soon disappeared again. In the area, there are people who believe that they know where that was buried. And what the upshot of that is that it seems that it might possibly be a black meteorite or something similar to that, and that it has been buried quite close to Dunsinane. And there are also those locally who think it would be a good idea to dig it up again. You've heard what I have to say, you have to make up your own mind. But the one thing, when you add in that some of the photographs taken over the past 100 years of the stone that was in Westminster up until 1950 don't seem to quite match the one that went back down there, you have to make up your own mind. But I know what I think.